cicada-geddon.
The cicadas are coming.
They're making their presence known.
This spring, the eastern United States will experience an invasion from a creature emerging in numbers not seen in centuries. They'll come in the night, bursting through the ground like an army of the undead. They've haunted American settlers for generations, with early colonists calling them a plague and even using them as an indicator that war was coming. With their red eyes and papery brown husks that they shed before achieving their final form, it's not hard to see why they inspired so much terror and awe.
You may have heard a lot of talk about cicadas in the last couple months in the media, which are like these flying black and red bugs, or maybe you haven't. So in today's video, we're going to be covering that because there is a lot that you should know. Let's get into it.
Well, you might have already heard the whiny buzzing sound all around you. In parts of the United States, cicadas are emerging from their 17-year wait underground. They're making their presence known. CBN correspondent Paul Petit takes us inside the world of this noisy insect. He tells us why this year's appearance is a historic event.
You may not always see them, but you can certainly hear them.
We're about to see billions of insects known as cicadas, commonly referred to as periodical cicadas because they only come out periodically every 13 or 17 years, depending on what broods you're talking about.
According to an article on forest preserves of Cook County, the cicadas are coming and you should hear them, not fear them. So what are cicadas anyways? And essentially a cicada is a very loud bug. The term cicada is a family of more than 3,000 species of sound-producing insects. Cicadas are found in tropical and temperate areas worldwide and occur in deserts, grasslands, and forests. Cicadas have long been used in folk medicines as religious and monetary symbols and as an important source of food for humans and other organisms. So yes, apparently people eat cicadas, and with this entire influx of cicadas coming, I've actually been seeing a whole bunch of articles popping up for recipes.
Terry, insectologists say that cicadas are high in protein, higher than eggs and pork. You ready for a
Yeah, I'm as perturbed as you are, but indigenous people in the Americas and the males of certain Asian species have even been kept in cages for their melodious songs. That is the cicadas, not the people of Asian countries, just so we got that clear. Yeah, according to this article on FPDCC, the cicadas are coming and you should hear them, not fear them. So essentially later this month, the 17-year cicada brood will emerge from the soil in Cook County and throughout northern Illinois. So you may have heard that there is a specific kind of cicada that is coming, or that the cicadas are emerging after 17 years. And the truth is there's actually 3,000 different kinds of cicadas. So it's just this specific kind of cicada that is emerging in Illinois, but it's special because they only come out every 17 years. A separate 13-year brood will come out of hiding further south in Illinois, and there will be overlap between the two in parts of central Illinois, so lots of sound-creating bugs, and something that hasn't occurred in 221 years.
17 states from northwest Louisiana up through Illinois and portions of the southeast will experience what some are calling cicada-geddon. Entomologists expect the harmless but noisy insects to emerge from the ground to feed and mate during May and June.
When soil temperatures hit about 64 degrees, 6 inches down on the year of an emergence, that's when they all know that's their cue to start coming out of the ground.
2024 will welcome 2 broods of cicadas, classified as 19 and 13. Certain northern states will see both, pushing the total cicada population into the trillions, something that hasn't happened since 1803.
There are a few overlapping counties there in Illinois, Iowa, Indiana, where you may see both of those emergences coming out at once, and you may have twice as many periodical cicadas.
So this article says, while the cicadas will be numerous and deafening, they're well worth experiencing, and there is no reason to avoid them. Like the solar eclipse, This is a natural phenomenon to experience and document, not be scared of. The cicadas won't be apocalyptic or louder than what we heard 17 years ago, says Nejin Elmasi, resource management training specialist with the forest preserves. They will not bite you. These cicadas have a straw called a proboscis to stick into trees and suck out nutrients, adds Zachary Selous, a conservation and experiential program CEP aide with the forest preserves. Aside from that, they're too busy finding a mate. Even if they just land on you, they just sit there. They're docile. So honestly, it's a little cool, I guess, that it's going to be like the eclipse is how they're referring to it. I have never experienced one of these waves of cicada awakenings. So if you have, let me know down in the comments below. So here's everything that you need to know about the cicadas, and this is according to another article over on WTTW News. But how loud will they get? How bad will they smell? Ew, they have a smell. And everything you didn't know to ask. So, as a flat state that's mostly farmland, Illinois isn't particularly known for its natural wonders. We don't have mountains or oceans, says this article, no Grand Canyons or giant sequoias. But in 2024, we can't be beat for our cicadas. 2 different broods of periodical cicadas are emerging at the same time. Imagine, you can't beat us. We've got thousands, millions, in fact, of bugs that have been in hiding for 17 years. Like, yuck. A 13-year brood in southern Illinois and a 17-year brood in the north. Something that hasn't happened since before Illinois was a state. So we heard 221 years. So that's crazy. Was there anyone around to write about this 221 years ago in Illinois? I don't know. But millions of these insects will burst from the ground, mate and die over a roughly 6-week period, just as their larvae hatch, drop to the ground, and start the cycle all over again. So here's my question. Have these larvae been sitting in the ground for 17 years? Or have, like, the bugs themselves just been alive and laying there for 17 years? Because if they're going to come up and literally mate and leave larvae and die all that fast, I'm assuming it's just the larvae that sits there for 17 years. I don't know. I'm so confused. How did they get under the ground, and how did they stay under the ground for 221 years? Like, you know, the dirt blows away. I have so many questions. But anyways, what are periodical cicadas? That is, in fact, one of the questions I have, and if you have that question, we're going to answer it. So if you're wondering, what's the big deal? Cicadas come out every summer. Well, those are annual or dog day cicadas from the genus Neotibichin. Periodical cicadas, genus Magicada, that's a difficult word, are only found in eastern U.S., and they're only seen above ground once every 13 or 17 years, showing up in late spring and early summer.
The 7 species of periodical cicadas in the United States all belong to the genus Magicicada, and they're unlike any other organism. Depending on the species, they spend either 13 or 17 years underground. No light, no movement, and very little food. No other insect on Earth takes this long to develop.
And guess what, you guys? I saw articles popping up that the cicadas have been coming out early already, so there's already some that are popping up, I guess, but of the 5,000 species of cicadas worldwide, okay, so this article says there's 5,000 species. The other one said there was 3,000. Only 10 are periodical, so it's a rare phenomenon we're witnessing. So there's 10 different kinds that will apparently wait for 17 or 13 years, and all the rest of the 4,990 are just every year. Aside from the fact that periodical cicadas will be here and gone before the annuals come out, the easiest way to tell the two apart is by their eyes. Periodical cicadas have distinctive red bulbs. Studies show Magicicada eyes turn red the fall before their emergence. Okay, so these ones, they can't be just larvae that are under the ground then if their eyes turn red. I swear I saw one of these red ones here in Ontario yesterday, but we'll get into that later if you live in Canada. So what's a brood? Back in 1893, scientists created a system of grouping periodical cicadas into broods. Members of a brood emerge on the same 13 or 17-year cycle, so those would be the 13 and the 17-year ones. In 2024, brood XIX, a 13-year brood, which happens to be the largest, and brood XII, a 17-year brood, are appearing in Illinois. So I think that that's interesting that they're both in Illinois, you know? Each brood is made up of multiple species distinguished by their song. Okay, so you can tell them apart by their sound, which they're so eloquently calling a song. These cicadas better sound beautiful, or I'm gonna be like, why are we saying that this is like an eclipse? This sounds more like a plague. Anyways, but they are distinguished by their song and also typically by the coloring on their abdomen. So for the people that were around 221 years ago, they could compare their two different 13 and 17-year-old cicadas by their stomachs, I guess. I don't know, that's how I compare turtles. Anyways, to tell a male from a female, flip the cicada over. No thanks. Female bodies come to more of a point. Okay. It's also funny that I mentioned that about turtles because if you flip a turtle over, my turtle, personally I have a turtle, they love that. I'm saying they because my turtle's name is Benjamin, and I named Benjamin when I got Benjamin, and Benjamin was the size of a loony. And I'm being very elusive to not gender Benjamin because when I got Benjamin, I read all of these articles about how to gender your turtle based off of their claws and their shell, and that some are more flat and some have a more rounder shell, and that's how you tell their gender. So I was comfortable in calling Benjamin. Well, Benjamin is a Benjamima. Benjamima laid her first eggs this year. So after all these years of questioning, thinking, maybe Ben is actually a girl, well, she laid her first eggs this year at 14. So if you were wondering what year or how old turtles start laying eggs, it's about 14. I guess that's pretty similar to when humans can start having a baby. Not advice. Don't go out there and get pregnant in middle school or high school. Not recommended. But anyways, let's get back to the cicadas, because each brood is made up of multiple species distinguished by their song, like we said, and also typically by the coloring on their abdomen. So if you want to flip them over, you go right ahead. I am not going to be willingly touching any cicadas, whether they are nice or not. So are we in double trouble then, considering that there are two broods of cicadas popping up at the same time, the 13 and the 17-year ones? Well, for one, if you're not in Illinois, you don't have much to worry about. So there are going to be more cicadas, which we will talk about, but this phenomenon where it's the two different broods popping up at the exact same time, that's only happening in Illinois, allegedly. So let's bust the biggest myth about the 2024 cicada palooza. Yuck.
The difference between the species and the broods. All the nomenclature gets a little tricky. There are 7 species of periodical cicada, and they fall within 3 groups: Decim, Cassini, and Decula. The Decim group was the first to split off from the others about 3.9 million years ago. Then, 2.5 million years ago, Cassini and Decula split off. And over time, each of these species evolved to have extremely lengthy developmental stages, taking 13 or 17 years instead of just the 1 year that is required for many other cicada species. Cicada broods, on the other hand, are groupings of periodical cicadas that simply come up at the same time. These broods are usually made up of several different species. To understand more about the development of cicadas, I spoke with Dr. Chris Simon.
So there's a lot of insects that live longer, maybe even some beetles that could live 50 years. But in terms of development from egg to adult, these are the longest known life cycles.
Yes, 2 broods are emerging in Illinois. No, that doesn't mean we'll have twice the cicadas. Okay, interesting. A lot of people think we're going to have double the amount. I've had calls from as far as California and Washington from people wanting to see this double emergence, said Ken Johnson, a horticulture educator with the University of Illinois Extension.
Is down on the year of an emergence. That's when they all know that's their cue to start coming out of the ground.
2024 will welcome 2 broods of cicadas, classified as 19 and 13. Certain northern states will see both, pushing the total cicada population into the trillions, something that hasn't happened since 1803.
There are a few overlapping counties there in Illinois, Iowa, Indiana, where you may see both of those emergences coming out at once, and you may have twice as many periodical cicadas.
Sorry, folks, they say the broods are not expected to overlap to any great extent. Okay, interesting. So then this is kind of like a falsehood then, that this is the first time that they're appearing. It's not, well, I guess not. They're appearing in the same year, but like not at the same time. So I guess that makes the headlines a little bit salacious. Or maybe not really, but a little exaggerated. But there's a very narrow line near Springfield, Illinois, where the two broods might come into contact, but not in any significant numbers, and people wouldn't be able to tell them apart anyway, according to researchers. Which is kind of interesting, because didn't they just say that they tell them apart by their stomachs and their song? I don't know. I feel like I'm being lied to right now. John Cooley, one of the country's foremost experts on periodical cicadas, is actually steering clear of the potential contact zone. I can't map anywhere near that zone because you don't know what you're dealing with, Cooley said. I can't go down to Springfield, Illinois and get a record of a cicada and tell you what brood it belongs to with 100% certainty. Okay, since it's in Springfield, is The Simpsons still running? There's a Springfield like everywhere, but is there going to be a cicada episode? Like, these are mainstream and it's happening in Springfield, and they're always alluding to like which Springfield it is, but they won't confirm. Anyways, this person says that they won't be able to tell John Cooley if he goes down to Springfield. He's not going to be able to tell them apart, so he's not going to do it. He's just not even going to try. He says, I can map all I want, just not anywhere near the contact zone. It's ironic. So the next question you might be asking is, do they sting? And apparently no.
They don't even have teeth, and they can't transmit disease, so they're basically harmless to humans, besides being very, very loud.
Apparently, like we said, if they land on you, no thank you, they're just gonna stay there. And I'm like, I'm not your home, Mr. and Mrs. Cicada, especially if you're going to be breeding. That's a no thanks. But they are a natural part of the ecosystem, and cicadas are innocuous, they said, which means I thought innocuous meant that they don't have poison. They're not poisonous. But the question was whether they bite. But let's see. What is the definition of innocuous? And it just means that it's not harmful or offensive. Okay, that's, you know what, fair enough. I guess it could mean biting or stinging, because I don't want an insect biting me even if it's not venomous. Like, keep that mouth to yourself. Like, learn some manners. So they are a natural part of the ecosystem, and they're really not out to get you or harm you or scare you or gross you out. Well, I'm sorry, but I don't care if they're here to gross me out. They gross me out anyways, making my skin crawl just thinking about them. They're just out to do their thing. Eat, grow, find a mate, that's it. In literally 7 days. Damn, that is a rushed life. You've got a lot to do in a week. It's kind of a live and let live here. In fact, one of the reasons periodical cicadas emerge in such massive amounts is because they're so defenseless. It's a strategy known as predator satiation. Basically, they overwhelm the system and guarantee that at least some of them will survive to reproduce. Could you imagine being like so worried about your survival as an entire species that you're like, let's like sleep for 17 years. Can I be part of that species? Can we have like 17-year hibernations? That'd be cute. I'm down. A nice 17-year sleep would be nice. Lengthy 13 and 17-year cycles and the patchwork of broods emerge in different years also makes it impossible for predators to sync up with periodical cicadas. Consider cicada killer wasps. They could feast on periodical cicadas, except they don't show up until mid to late summer. And also they only show up every 13 to 17 years. So you're going to be real hungry if that's all you're eating. When their life cycle matches that of the far more reliable annual cicada, that's when they're going to come out.
When cicadas lose track of time, they tend to come up either 4 years too early or 4 years too late. One researcher has hypothesized that cicadas might count in intervals of 4, even though they sometimes come out in odd-numbered years.
If they're ready to come out early, they'll come out early, but only in a 4-year window. They'll come out 4 years early, or sometimes if they're not ready, 4 years late.
But even if cicadas could count up to 4 and group those numbers together, how would they know when a year had passed? Sure, they can tell the temperature is changing to a certain extent based on soil temperature, but being underground insulates them from the more extreme seasonal variations that happen in the air. They also can't see any light, so they have no way of knowing when the sun rises or sets.
Okay, so what's the timeline? Periodical cicadas bust out topside when the soil temperature hits 64 degrees. The nymphs, or juveniles, look for a structure to climb, a tree, a building, a blade of grass, where they can hold steady and shed their exoskeleton. This process can last for 90 minutes and often occurs at night because the nymphs are wide open to predators as they molt. It takes another 90 minutes or so for the adult's body to harden and its wings to unfurl. Then they head for the treetops, and within 4 to 5 days, the males start singing, which is their mating call. I mean, I sing a lot too, but it hasn't attracted any mates. Kind of just scares people away.
And even though 13-year cicadas and 17-year cicadas develop on different timescales, their life cycles are surprisingly similar. Cicada nymphs go through 5 instars, or developmental stages. But because those 5 stages all happen underground, they're pretty hard to monitor. An entomologist in Connecticut, Chris Meyer, conducted an incredible experiment to see what was going on beneath the soil. Starting in 1979, he dug up 100 cicada nymphs every single year for 17 years. He noted the amount of time it took for the nymphs to move from one instar to the next, observing that the older they got, the longer it took for the majority of them to transition into the next developmental phase. He also noticed that they weren't all growing at the same rate, an interesting observation that tells us their timekeeping is probably not tied to how big they get. Near the end of this 17-year experiment in 1995, he noticed that the nymphs' eyes changed from white to red, signaling that they would be emerging the next spring. When the nymphs reach their 5th instar and get to the 13th or 17th year of their cycle, they wait for the soil to reach the right temperature. At their depth of 20 centimeters, the soil needs to warm up to 17.9 degrees Celsius or 64 degrees Fahrenheit, which happens around April or May. Then, one evening, they tunnel their way through the dirt, sometimes even creating mud turrets, which are basically little towers that rise above the ground on their way out. They climb onto whatever vertical surface is closest to them and begin the final stage of development, molting. And this part is a little bit gross, but also super cool. Their skin splits along the thorax, what we would think of as their back. Their head, and then body, and then legs wiggle free, while the lining of their breathing tubes, or trachea, are turned inside out. Once they've fully emerged, their tiny wing flaps must be inflated like little balloons. Fluid pumps through the veins of their wings, making them expand. Once they've fully emerged from their shell, their exoskeleton hardens and darkens. And then they're ready to start the courtship process.
John Kritsky, longtime cicada researcher, said it generally takes 2 weeks for all the members of a brood to finally make it above ground and the singing to hit full volume. It kind of reminds me of like the Who's down in Whoville, who liked Christmas a lot. You know? Speaking of volume, how loud is loud? Well, periodical cicadas actually aren't as loud as annuals, but it's a numbers game. There are millions of them at once.
And when it comes to the noise level of cicadas, this will give you a pretty good idea. Yeah, in full throttle, cicadas could actually be 10 decibels louder than a police siren. In fact, in one South Carolina county, officials had to tell residents to stop calling 911, reporting that alarms were going off.
When the males start singing, and it's only the males who sing, they can hit 90 decibels or levels as high as your typical lawn care equipment, except the singing lasts for hours. Okay, that's exciting.
And once they've left the ground, the real party gets started. The male cicadas gather together in chorus centers to broadcast their call for the females. This song is one of the loudest known among insects and is produced with an organ that no other insect has. Love them or hate them, it's hard to not be impressed by these intense, loud, and crunchy guys.
Males are the only ones that make the noise, and they move into calling areas. They want to all be as loud as possible to draw in those ladies from as far out as they can.
They'll start revving up at 10 a.m. and go till sundown, said Kritsky. It sounds like your typical male, actually. typical human male driving around in their frickin' motorbikes with the loud-ass mufflers and the loud-ass muffler cars that are just loud to scream, I have no testicles, and if I do, they're small. Ugh, it's so annoying. No offense to anybody that enjoys their muscle cars. I just can't stand vehicles that are just extra loud for no reason except for to be loud. To be like, look at me, I'm loud. Like, haven't we been working on muffler technology for the last 100 years to, like, get the opposite of that so that we can have a nice, quiet muffler? I don't know. Makes no sense to me. But things apparently quiet down after sunset for the cicadas. Otherwise, the cicadas would make themselves vulnerable to nocturnal predators, and then they would get eaten, and then that would be a waste of waiting 17 years, I guess. So, on the most perfect summer afternoon, hot but not too hot, and kind of muggy with a hazy sun, they'll synchronize their singing, and that's a whole other level. It hurts your ears, said this researcher Cooley. That synchronizing will be 110, 120 decibels easy, which is pain, he said. Interesting. Well, I would like to hear it. But is this music to a lady cicada, you might be wondering? Well, a female cicada, she bats her cicada eyelashes, likes what she hears from a certain fella. She'll flick her wings if he makes just the right kind of song. So I guess it's like hearing like your perfect crooner voice, you know, like, tell me when will you be mine? No, I guess I'm not attracting any lady cicadas myself, but she'll place 20 to 40 eggs in each slit and continue along a branch until she's exhausted her egg supply if she hears just that magnificent cicada voice. I don't know, I kind of feel that way when I go see a good Broadway show and like the leading male has like that amazing beckoning crooner voice. But yeah, so these cicadas, they're gonna fill up your trees with some cicadas, and that is the good, exciting thing. But I'm just so confused, like, where are they going? And how are they going to be surviving for 17 years? I don't know. That's what I am most confused about.
When they're underground, they survive off eating xylem, which is liquid from tree roots. And then, on one momentous spring night, millions and millions of them emerge at once. An unthinkable number of organisms living their lives in complete synchrony. Then they climb up whatever vertical surface is closest, and then they tear open their skin and burst out in their final winged form. All told, there will be trillions of cicadas emerging around the same time across the US.
And if you're wondering, if you're Canadian, if you're going to have any cicadas or if they're going to cross at all, well, let's talk about it. Here is an article that is on the National Post, and it says, from late April through June, the broods will be seen in the southeast and Midwest, from Oklahoma to Virginia, from Wisconsin to Louisiana. Okay. And it says trillions of cicadas are emerging in the 17 U.S. states. Is Canada next? Ew, trillions? Ew. It says 1803. That's the last year that it happened with the two different kinds. Anyways, I'm confused because didn't the other articles say that it was just going to be in Illinois? I think you need to look out. Wherever you are, there might be just a plague of cicadas coming. And if it was biblical times, they would be writing about these cicadas probably. When and where will the emergence occur? Okay, that gets me wondering, because I've also seen articles that were like, no, cicadas and locusts are not the same thing, which makes me wonder about the plague of locusts from the Bible, if you've read the Bible. I'm like, were they actually cicadas? Because that would really make sense, right? If they came out 13 and 17 years apart. But also, like, are locusts or grasshoppers or anything, are those periodical too? Like, maybe those actually come out every certain number of years, or if it's just the weather, I don't know. Because there's certain years where there's just way more grasshoppers than anybody would ever want to, like, have, ever.
For more insight to this rare occurrence, we turn to the author of God and the World of Insects.
The perceived conflict between science and the Bible was something that I just wanted to help bridge a gap, particularly in my field in entomology.
Josh Shoemaker, entomologist and biblical scholar, enjoys where the two fields intersect.
If you look at the covenant that God made with Noah, in that covenant, he says he's making it with Noah, but it says he's also making it with all the creatures of the earth. And so to me, when I look at that passage, it shows me that the insects are also something that's important to God.
While cicadas are often referred to as locusts, they are actually two different species. Some of the Jewish community liken the noise cicadas make to a song of liberation, much like the sound from Miriam's tambourine as she led the Hebrew women in worship after crossing the Red Sea.
Here we have these cicadas. They really have been trapped for 17 years. You know, they were in their own Egypt. They were in their own exile. They were under the ground. You know, they were in these tunnels, you know, held hostage by the ground. And when they come out, don't look at it that they are making your life miserable. Look at it that they are singing to you. There's a message. There's a liberation.
Rabbi Afzon writes for the American Israelite, a Jewish newspaper in Cincinnati. His monthly column is titled Lessons for Life from Life. He believes everything we see and hear is ordained from God for a purpose, even the noise or singing from a cicada.
And that's really how we have to live our life. We have to be singing God's praises.
But this article says, will Canada also be impacted? While the U.S. is home to a range of periodical cicadas, the species of cicadas found in Canada are annual. And I knew that living in Belleville. There was like a bazillion of them. It was disgusting. Species like Okanagan canadensis, known commonly as the Canadian cicada, can be found across almost every province and territory, excluding the Northwest Territories and Nunavut, and that's just because it's probably way too cold. It is typically active from June to July, peaking in June. And you guys, like underneath the bridges and stuff in Belleville, there would be like a bazillion of these. You go rollerblading and it's like, absolutely disgusting. So no, there are not going to be any of these ones in Canada, but southern Ontario is home to dog day cicadas with their distinctive green markings, which is interesting. And how do cicada emergences affect other wildlife? Well, there will be a lot of full bellies among predators of cicadas, which are just about anything with a mouth. A range of amphibians, birds, mammals, insects, arachnids, and reptiles eat cicadas, with some even changing their diets to accommodate the glut. The glut. Amazing. Okay, so there won't be any of these cicadas, but there still is going to be a bazillion cicadas. They're just not going to be coming out and singing at 120 decibels.
But why did some evolve to be underground for 13 years and some for 17? Because as these cicadas were evolving, something else was happening in North America. From 2.6 million to 11,700 years ago, continent-sized ice sheets formed in North America, which then underwent repeated expansion and contraction. Researchers think the growth and dissipation of ice may have affected how these species split off from one another, since the 17-year species are all more northerly than the 13-year species. In other words, maybe they were first geographically isolated by glaciers, and then they adapted to have longer life cycles because they were in a colder climate.
But I don't know, you guys. What do you think? Are you excited for the cicadas? If you live in Illinois, are you going to be going outside and listening for these cicadas?
You won't be able to see all 7 species come up as adults at the same time again until 2037.
The articles describe this as like not pleasant, like painful. I don't know. The eclipse was not painful. I live somewhere where I did not see at all these northern lights that apparently occurred literally everywhere, but I guess that's what I get for growing up in Alberta, Canada, where I got to see the northern lights all the time. But everybody else that saw the northern lights, they were like pink and lavender and all these pretty colors. I'm a little bit jealous, actually, but anyways, let me know what you guys think of all of these cicadas and all this cicada talk.
One group of researchers proposed an interesting hypothesis, that the cicadas are counting the seasons based on the trees whose roots they're feeding from. If you remember, we mentioned that cicadas drink xylem, which is one of the 2 fluids that trees produce. You're probably more familiar with the first, which is sap, or more specifically, phloem. It's a thicker liquid and is far more nutritional. Xylem, meanwhile, is mostly water with low levels of minerals and other nutrients. Xylem is so nutrient poor that cicadas wouldn't even be able to survive on it if not for the endosymbiotic bacteria that they have within their bodies, bacteria that allow them to create essential amino acids from xylem. But even though xylem doesn't have many nutrients in it, the chemical composition still changes as a tree moves through the seasons, with more or less nutrients depending on the time of year. To test their hypothesis that cicadas were counting the cycles of trees, researchers potted fully grown peach trees in large pots and created 2 different light and temperature regimens for them. The first set of trees grew like they normally would, with 365 days of light and 4 seasons. The second set of trees were artificially accelerated to have twice as many days and more rapidly changing seasons, so that they'd react as if 1 year were actually 2. And this part of the experiment was pretty successful, with the accelerated peach trees leafing and flowering twice in a year rather than once, though they only produced fruit once. The researchers also collected 130 cicada nymphs, who were in their 15th year of their 17-year cycle. 100 of those nymphs went to the trees on the accelerated timescale, and 30 of the nymphs were in normal pots. This experiment was a little tricky because cicada nymphs are apparently hard to transport from one place to another. They have a really high rate of mortality. So only 13 nymphs survived to emerge from the soil of the entire 130 that were brought to the experiment.
I know this is not the typical kind of video that I make on my channel, my YouTube channel. That's what this is. This is not a video. This is a video. This place where I'm posting it is a YouTube channel. Anyways, I know we don't usually talk about bugs here, unless we're talking about Abby Lee Miller, but I mean like tiny bugs. Anyways.
Despite how much we've learned about them, periodical cicadas still hold one of the biggest mysteries in ecology.
Once they've reached their year of emergence, we know what triggers them to come out, the ground temperature, but we don't know exactly how they keep track of those years, and we don't know exactly how they know when to come out.
In northeast India, there's one known as the World Cup cicada for the way its cycle ties to the football championship. And in Fiji, there's one with an 8-year cycle. You might notice something about those other 2 species. Their life cycles are both based on 4-year intervals. But the North American periodical cicadas have 13 and 17-year cycles, which don't fit that pattern.
So hopefully after watching this video, you are not so afraid of the cicadas, but I'm still a little bit grossed out myself. What about you? Let me know down in the comments, and I'll catch you in the next one.